Hi everyone, Hackthany/Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Autopsy album. Let me get this right. Ashes, Organs, Blood, and Crypts. This is a brand new LP from California death metal legends Autopsy. It's their 9th, in fact. A quick follow-up to Morbidity Triumphant, which was one of my favorite death metal records of last year. Now, of the many death metal bands that hit creative peaks in the 80s and 90s, and there are many, Autopsy has had one of the better comebacks of all those bands in recent years. A lot of them started coming out of the woodwork, or maybe more so the wood chipper in the 2010s to kind of show us if they still got it. And I would argue Autopsy very much does 5 albums deep into this return. It actually almost feels like a second wind of sorts, considering there was an 8-year album gap following their 2014 record. The similarly titled Tourniquets, Hacksaws, and Graves. The band really loves a good list. They seem to be having a lot of creative chemistry with their new bassist as well, Greg Wilkinson, who wasn't a game changer per se on the band's last full-length LP, which maybe I can understand why. He was pretty new to the band. Also, sonically and stylistically, Morbidity Triumphant is very much a blunt force attack to the cranium. It's got some great riffs and solos and switch-ups for sure, but the drums are so pounding and the guitars eat up so much of the mix on top of it, there's not a whole ton of room for nuance. Believe it or not though, Blood and Crypts over here is actually still just as brutal, but somehow more balanced, which leaves a lot more room for Chris Reifert's unhinged, psychotic screams, as well as Wilkinson's bass, which busts out some wild licks and harmonic details, much more than you would expect on an Autopsy record, given that's not really necessarily been the selling point of the band's past stuff, the bass work. But you hear it prominently throughout the record, especially on the closer, which throws a crushing spin on some galloping heavy metal grooves. But generally, I feel like the band's been sounding revitalized lately, refusing to simply give us a forgettable, standard, by-the-numbers, throwback death metal record that only the purists will eat up. But instead on this new one, they're finding some cool ways to stick to their old school sound, while adding some nice details and working in some other shades of metal music too. They're actually sounding surprisingly dynamic for a band of Autopsy's age and era, like the way they're able to move from speedy, deadly death metal on the intro track of the record to these headbanging solo passages, and even these doomy outro sections that are quite melodic. Really keeps me on the edge of my seat the entire way from transition to transition. There's also the slow, massive riffs and harmonized guitar leads all over a well of entrails. The visuals on the lyrics with this one are quite something. The guitar layers on this track are somehow dramatic and extravagant, especially for a death metal record, but still quite gruesome too. And this is a great contrast to some of the faster and more extreme sections of the song. And of course, there are other cuts on this LP that are just ragers from front to back. THROATSAW, as well as Death is the Answer, save for the second half. Also, Toxic Death Fuck. We need a few cuts like these on a record from Autopsy, especially Toxic Death Fuck, which is a track all about death via pollution, but also these chemicals kind of bringing you back to life. It's putrid, it's disgusting, it's filthy, and also comes complete with Chris coughing at a very pivotal moment of the song. MARROW FIEND, which was a highlight for me too, is one of the grooviest cuts on the record, has a lot of synced up riffs, really mid-paced and visceral, and of course builds up to a moment where Chris is sounding like an on-the-loose cannibal, ready to consume anyone within earshot. Now, a few complaints I have on some key tracks. The pacing and speed on No Mortal Left Behind is not the best, kind of low impact. I feel like Reifert's drums could have done something else to bring more of a pulse to the song, even if it's not one of the faster tracks here. I will say a true highlight of the record is when on this track, he's screaming, "Everyone's dead! Everything's dead!" There's also Bones to the Wolves, which is one of a few slower, doomier cuts on the record, of which there are a few. I just don't see what this one brings to the album necessarily. It's not especially slow or heavy or melodic or memorable. It just kind of feels like it blends in with the other tracks in not the best way. Then Lobotomizing Gods is surprisingly varied for its length, but there are no standout leads coming from the slower moments. The faster passages of the track have riffs that are a little messier than some of the others on the record, to the point where whatever they're playing doesn't fully translate. The overall sound of the track is still respectably brutal though, and as I was kind of implying earlier in the review, the production on this record is somehow better than it was on the last. The mixing is great, everything is so heavy and clear, dirt-caked but also punchy, pretty vibrant for a death metal record as well. The performances end to end on this record are impressive, even on tracks that aren't my favorite writing-wise. Everything feels so crushing and organic and free-flowing, especially during the slower moments where the band doesn't sound snapped to a tight tempo. The guitar work and tones on this thing are colorful, they're intense, they're searing per usual. That wasn't really a surprise for Autopsy, just kind of expected. But the extra detail on the bass guitar end of things really brings an extra something to the Autopsy equation that I didn't even know I wanted. Chris Reifert's drums and vocals continue to contribute greatly to the lifeblood of the band too. And overall, I think this is just another great and very solid album from one of the trustiest bands in the death metal tradition, feeling a light to decent 8 on this one. Transition, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Autopsy, forever.